ghost activity, fringe science, interdimensional beings, psychic phenomenon, and conspiracy theories. Does the truth exist? How close are we to finding it? Come listen and discover the answers yourself. Welcome to the Paranormal MD, where the out of the ordinary is discussed weekly. Join your host, Mary Marshall, and her guest as they inform, discuss, and entertain you. Mary welcomes your input during the program, so call in and let your opinions and voice be heard. Talk radio just got weirder, wiser, and more interesting. Now, here is your host of the Paranormal MD Radio Show, Mary Marshall.
Hello, and welcome to the Paranormal MD. I'm Mary Marshall, your host, and it is my pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. Thanks for joining me. My guest this evening, who will be joining us in a little bit, is Jesse. And he's going to kill me because I don't know if I think it's Pollack. And Mark Moran, who are premiering right here on this show, their soon-to-be-released book titled The Devil's Teeth. This is a true story of a gruesome paranormal murder. They examine this all but forgotten unsolved murder case from 1972, in which the body of a teenage girl was discovered atop a cliff high above an abandoned quarry, and the victim was just a teenage girl, and her name was Jeanette De Palma. Her body was discovered, and it just seems to be cult-related, and we will talk to them about this case and this tragic death and very bizarre story. So stay tuned for that. And if you would like to call, the phone lines will be open after 9 p.m. And don't forget to sign up for the Roundtable Listener Discussion Panel. The first one is going to be airing on April 10th, and we will have them periodically, pretty much bi-monthly after then. So sign up. It's on the homepage over at theparanormalmdradio.com. So you can sign up, submit it, and give yourself a voice, an opinion. Get on the show here. So, and then for anybody who's listening, if you're not in the chat room, you should come and join us in the chat room right now. It is a great place. We have a lot of fun in there. We all get to hang out together, listen to the show, make comments. Also, you can pose your questions in the chat room that can be asked of the guests or me. Pam, your chat master, will relay your questions to me and basically ask for you. So if you're kind of shy, it's a great way to do it. So come in the chat room. So now tonight we have a little bit of a time limit here, so we only have a couple minutes or a few minutes for some weird stories, weird world stories. So you know what time it is, Pam?
What time is it, Mary?
That's right, Pam. It's Weird World News and what you didn't know.
There's a lot I don't know, but I love this segment.
I know. You know what? Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's serious, but, So since we are kind of in a little bit of a crunch tonight, time-wise, you want to just start us off right away with a story? Hit me with a story.
Sure. This is by Miriam Kramer. And the sun unleashes monster solar flare, biggest of 2014. The sun fired off a major solar flare late Monday, February 24th, making it the most powerful sun eruption of the year so far and one of the strongest in recent years. The massive X4.9 class solar flare erupted from an active sunspot called AR1990. Earth isn't in danger from the latest eruption of space weather activity, according to the officials with spaceweather.com. This is the strongest flare of the year so far and one of the strongest of the current solar cycle. However, Earth isn't totally out of the woods yet. This region of the sun is set to rotate more fully into view of Earth over the next week, according to officials with the NOAA-led Space Weather Prediction Center. The X-class solar flares are the most powerful kind of solar storms. It directed at Earth. Last night's solar flare could have caused a serious geomagnetic storm created when charged particles slam into the planet's magnetic field. When aimed at Earth, strong solar flares can harm satellites and astronauts in orbit around the Earth.
Well, that would explain a lot.
Right?
Yes. I mean, you know what? We've been having a lot of issues. Apparently, totally unrelated, Skype was hacked. So anybody that was, this happened, I believe, yesterday. So if anybody is listening, before you use it, you need to update your Skype and download their new thing in there, and it'll protect you and all that. So that's one thing. But then in general, it's just all of this has been just the satellites. I mean, that's our internet, or it's playing havoc with things. So, but at least we're not going to die.
How can we live without it?
Well, at least we're not going to die, so that's a good thing. Have some giant meteor.
Well, there's some that might argue with you on that one if they lose their internet. Just saying. There's some that might argue that point.
This is true. I'm going to skip to the... Not skip, but go to the next one, the next story for tonight, because this is actually an amendment to something we've talked about last week. This has to do with the hippo sweat.
No.
Because I'm not so crazy. Yeah, how I question the fact of, well, how would these properties work? Would this work on human skin, and so on and so forth? And this would be a great alternative for those who have allergies to traditional sunblock, because here's the thing, anybody who missed it last week, hippos sweat, first of all, is red. They sweat red. But then they'd also... Is
it blood?
It is not. It is not.
Okay.
But they do, their sweat works as a sunblock, an antibacterial, and, as I've learned, also bug repellent. So I decided just a couple days ago, I'm like, I'm going to go look this up. So, went on to Google, checked it out. Apparently, I'm not crazy for questioning these things and saying, and so much for me making the hundreds, as we discussed on this idea, because this article dated back to 2009, in that scientists hope to create a product inspired by hippo sweat that we may be slathering on our bodies before long. The stuff could be an advertiser's dream. It would also be nice, to try and replicate the antiseptic and insect repellent characteristics of the sweat to obtain a 4-in-1 product: sunscreen, sunblock, antiseptic, insect repellent. This was reported by Discovery News. So, and the only comment that this was, yes, from the properties of that. And then the only other comment is just so long as the stuff doesn't smell like hippos, we're good. That was basically what the
Okay, now here's a question I have for you, though. First of all, aren't hippos normally in water? So who got the hippo to sweat in the first place to figure this out?
God. He gave them sweat glands. I don't know. What do you mean I got them to sweat? They sweat. That's probably what gives them that kind of pinkish hue to their skin. If you've ever noticed, maybe their skin is really more, I don't know, but but it's the red pigments in there that actually work to diffuse the ultraviolet in the sun, which is creating, nature just has its way. Apparently, it
still baffles me that somebody got a hippo to work up a sweat, first of all. And I also understand that they're very mean creatures, so I certainly wouldn't want to aggravate one.
What do you mean
in the
it
first
has
place?
to work up a sweat? What, they didn't put them on a treadmill? They're sitting in, baking in the sun all day. It's just a natural course of the heat that they are subjected to.
Oh.
There's no mystery. They just sweat. All right, so now we go from hippo sweat. I figured we might as well stay on the bodily fluid theme to urine.
Oh, no. Well,
no,
somebody in the chat room had a hippo pee on them, so...
How the heck do you even get a hippo to... Like, what are they doing that close to a hippo, first of all?
Right.
The questions, oh my goodness. All right.
Okay, go on with your urine story, please.
Okay, so it's not a bad urine story. This actually has to do with urine tests detect not pregnancy, but cancer. This was reported just on the 24th, and apparently peeing on a strip of paper could one day reveal signs of cancer and cardiovascular disease. So there's an experimental test that uses worm-shaped nanoparticles, back to those nanos, to spot evidence of tumors and blood clots in mouse urine. And so unlike diagnostic tools, you can just end up putting it like on a strip like you would for a pregnancy test, and you could find out if you have cancer or cardiovascular disease. And then, and I'm going to have to blow through this story, earwax. Okay, so we just got some more body and bodily stuff. Okay, so if you would describe yourself as white or black, your earwax is probably yellow and sticky. If you are East Asian or Native American, I bet you didn't know, it is likely to be dry and white. And for those of you with the yellow kind, that I hate to break it to you, but your earwax stinks. According to a team, this was inspired to see if different ethnic groups, their earwax odors, and if it coincided to underarm odor or odor, and so on and so forth. So apparently, you can tell things about a person's health in relation to this. We're going to have to cut Weird World News short tonight because we got a late start due to the darn solar flares messing everything up on us.
That's our story. We're sticking with it.
That's right, but we're good now. So we're going to need to take a break in just a few seconds. And when we come back, I will be talking with Jesse Pollack and Mark Moran, the co-authors of The Devil's Teeth. So grab a drink, but don't go far away. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsor. Hello and welcome to the Paranormal MD. I'm Mary Marshall, your host, and it is my pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. Thanks for joining me. My guest this evening, who will be joining us in a little bit, is Jesse. He's going to kill me because I don't know if I think it's Pollack. And Mark Moran, who are premiering right here on this show, their soon-to-be-released book titled The Devil's Teeth. This is a true story of a gruesome paranormal murder. They examine this all but forgotten unsolved murder case from 1972, in which the body of a teenage girl was discovered atop a cliff high above an abandoned quarry, and the victim was just a teenage girl, and her name was Jeanette De Palma. Her body was discovered, and it just seems to be cult-related, and we will talk to them about this case and this tragic death and very bizarre story. So stay tuned for that. So we're going to need to take a break in just a few seconds. And when we come back, I will be talking with Jesse Pollack and Mark Moran, the co-authors of The Devil's Teeth. So grab a drink, but don't go far away. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsor. Hello and welcome back. I'm Mary Marshall, your host, and you are listening to the Paranormal MD Radio Show live. And now I want to give you a little bit of information about the guests tonight. Mark Moran and Jesse Pollack co-authored a book titled The Devil's Teeth. They examined an all but forgotten unsolved murder case from 1972 in which the body of a teenage girl was discovered atop a cliff and she was murdered. We will talk to them more about the specifics of that murder in a minute, but a little bit more. Mark, along with co-creator of Weird New Jersey magazine that I believe started in 1989. It is published twice a year, and Jesse is also a contributor to that magazine. So now I would like to, without further ado, bring them on to the show. So welcome, Jesse and Mark, to the Paranormal MD Show.
Thanks, Mary. Nice to be here.
Thanks for having us on.
Oh, I'm so glad that you are joining us this evening. This is such an incredible story from what I do know about it. I guess, guys, I think the first thing to ask is, you obviously, because of being a contributor and being a creator of the magazine, were acquainted with each other first before the story came along, correct?
I hadn't met Jesse prior to the story. This actually, I mean, the actual murder case goes back to 72, as you said, but I wasn't actually investigating it for an article until much later, like 30 years later. It was in the late 90s, I guess, and I don't know how old Jesse was.
12 or 13.
So, Mark, you started to look into the story first, correct? Is that what you're then saying?
Yeah, with our magazine, it deals with the stories could be new or they could be old, whatever sort of unusual, forgotten, buried piece of history or folklore was, in circulating in the state of New Jersey. Myself and my partner, Mark Skirman, would go out and try to chronicle these things that had largely been unreported on and just forgotten. And this was one of the ones that was kind of swept under the rug. It was there were a couple of reports in the local papers for about 2 weeks after the body was found. And then after that, it sort of just it faded out of the media attention, but it never faded out of the consciousness of the residents of that area. So with our magazine, a lot of it is just people telling us hearsay. We're sort of like a sounding board for people who have maybe not a complete story to tell, but little snippets, little fragments of stories, clues. And every once in a while, someone would from that area, the state, would say to us, when I was a teenager, there was this really weird murder that involved the occult and witchcraft and Satanism, and they wouldn't know much more about it, but it was enough to make me think that there was some kind of a story there worth digging into. So that's what I did.
And Jesse, how did you get involved in this and bring it forth to where it is today?
Well, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, I was going away on a road trip, and right before we left, my grandmother went to the local newsstand over by Vintage Vinyl, which is a record store in the Edison area in Jersey, and she saw this magazine called Weird New Jersey, and she said, well, Jesse likes weird things. I'll get this for him to read in the car. And I got hooked, and I started writing in letters about urban legends I was hearing on the playground in school, stuff that my parents told me. And I met Mark for the first time at a book signing about 7 or 8 years ago, and we stayed in touch here and there on Facebook. And when I went to move out of the tri-state area a couple years ago, I got all of my Weird New Jersey collection back together, and I'm flipping through one article one issue that I had an article in, and I saw the Jeanette De Palma case featured in there, and I said, it's been 10 years since this article came out, but someone must have written a really good book about it by now. And I searched all over the internet, and sure enough, no one had. So I said, well, I'd really like to read a book about this, so I guess I'm going to have to write it. And from there on out, I started trying to track down her family, the police that investigated the case. And as more and more developments happened with my research, I kept Mark posted. And about a year after I started, Mark and I started making more developments together, and we decided to join forces on this upcoming book.
Now, did you run into difficulties? I know that you talked to a lot of the residents, but as far as anybody with the police department, was anybody still around from that period of time?
The interesting thing about that case was, as Mark brought up, there was a kind of opinion that leaked its way into the media that possibly this girl, Jeanette De Palma, had died at the hands of devil worshippers or witches, and that did not bring a lot of positive attention to the town. So at the time, with the police officers and the investigators in the prosecutor's office, mum was the word. So later on, flash forward to present day, Mark and I were able to get a hold of a lot of the original investigators who were still alive, and for the most part, they agreed to speak with us. There were only a couple that didn't want to, but the problem we've run into is a lot of the people investigating the case now, or who are supposed to be investigating the case, anytime we ask them for a comment, we can't comment on this. We've asked for a look at her case file, and the official word is, her case file was destroyed in a flood in 1999, so there are no files for you to look at.
Since the very beginning, it's been an extremely difficult case to really investigate because, at the magazine, we've received dozens and dozens of letters from people who were around that area at that time who all had little leads or clues, or they point to this person or that person, but every single one of them, without exception, came in anonymously. No return address on the envelope, no signature on the letter, and even people that I talked to in person would say, don't tell anybody that I told you this. There was, even after 35 years, there was this fear that people had of retribution, that there was some dark force they felt involved with this killing that somehow, even 35 years later, would come back to seek retribution on them if they said anything or made a quote that could be attributed to them. It was just spooky from the very beginning. It wasn't like a normal case. There was something, everybody was just completely frightened by this particular case, and it made investigation very, very difficult from the very beginning.
At this point, we really need, and whoever wants to take the lead on this, but I think people kind of need to get an overview. What is the story that we're referring to? And then we can get into more specifics.
Dutchie's probably the best to tell you that. He's very good with the timeline of events, so maybe he can encapsulate it for you.
Yeah, sure. Basically, the story starts on August 7th, 1972. Jeanette De Palma was a teenager who lived in Springfield, New Jersey, which is in Union County, kind of an affluent suburb. And basically, she got up on the morning of August 7th, told her parents that she was going to take a train to Berkeley Heights to see a friend of hers, and she never came home. They reported her missing, and by all accounts, the Springfield police did not take it seriously. They figured, oh, this is some hippie teenager that ran off to do whatever. It's not worth our time. Until about 6 weeks later, on September 19th, a dog brought an arm home to its owners at the Wilson Road Apartments, about 2.5 miles away from Jeanette's house. And these apartments were across the road from an old abandoned rock quarry called the Hudai Quarry. The superintendent of this apartment building called the police and said, my dog just brought an arm home. The police figured it was a prank because the local kids had been giving the superintendent a lot of trouble for the past couple of months. They had been dumping her trash out on her front door, stuff like that. And the officer that I spoke to that responded to the scene even told me, when I saw the arm from a distance, I thought it was a mannequin arm with ketchup on it. And it wasn't until I got closer to it and saw it had fingernails did I realize, okay, this is real. So,
oh, my gosh.
Yeah. They organized a search party. They borrowed some bloodhounds from the Ocean County Sheriff's Department. And a couple of hours later, at about 6 o'clock, they found Jeanette De Palma's body laying on top of a cliff in the woods surrounding the quarry area. The cliff was about 40 feet tall. It was impossible to get to by vehicle. And even with machetes and ladders, it was still pretty hard to get up to the spot where she was found. She had been found laying face down, and this is where the story gets a little strange, and this is where the witchcraft and occultism rumors started to begin. One of the officers that was at the scene when the body was found leaked to the press that she had been found with sticks and stones arranged in the shape of a coffin around her body with smaller sticks arranged in the shape of little crucifixes around her. For one reason or another, the press ran with it and said this is witchcraft. To understand why, you would have to go into a lot of the other events that had been happening in Union County around that same time. About 8 months prior, a mild-mannered accountant by the name of John List shot his family to death, wrapped them in sleeping bags, cooked himself a chicken dinner, and disappeared until he was finally located in the early 90s.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So it was a very dark period in what was supposed to be white-collar suburban New Jersey. And another thing to realize what a strange place this girl was found in, they could not get her down by foot. They ended up having to call in the Springfield Fire Department, and they backed up a fire truck to the edge of the cliff, and they brought her down on what they call a Stokes stretcher. It's the kind that you see people airlifted up in when they've had a serious injury.
Let me just stop you for a moment, because
Sure.
Because if there's such difficulty in getting up to this place and getting her down, what are they proposing? How did she get there in the first place?
That's one of the questions we asked the police and everybody involved repeatedly. Their supposition was that, it's just some runaway. She went up there, she got stoned, and she OD'd, and she laid there for a couple of months and decomposed. But there are so many problems with that story. This was not a place where kids her age, 15, 16, went to party. It was so remote. It's so hard to get to. And if it was a place where kids went to party, they would have noticed a body laying around in those 2 summer months. So she was there in a place where nobody goes. And it's not a place where somebody can go and dump a body because there's no way to get there. You'd have to literally, even if you had a dead body to dump, you'd have to carry it up a cliffside, maybe, over your shoulder, I guess. It's very difficult, and Jesse can attest because I've taken him there recently. If you even get there on foot, on your own 2 feet, let alone carrying a 120-pound person. So their concept that this was a dump job or a kid that went here to get high is completely ludicrous. And it just seemed like they didn't care to find out the truth. It kind of felt like it was our job to take on the case ourselves.
Do you think that it was intentionally swept under the rug, so to say, because of it being such a gruesome murder in this type of town? So you think that they kind of just were not addressing the facts in this case?
Very early on, there were allegations of police cover-up, and one of the most common was that the police chief's son had a unrequited love affair with Jeanette, and he killed her. But it was all speculation. But there were a lot of rumors going around. I can tell you firsthand that the vast majority of letters that we got at the magazine after we first published the story were all pointing in the direction of police corruption in this case.
Oh, my goodness. You're really still confronted with a lot of speculation as much as you are fact in this case, correct?
Oh, yeah. Every time we answer one question, 3 more pop up.
We're going to have to take a break in probably about 90 seconds here. So I don't want to have you get too much more involved into talking about the story, because I do want to continue on where you were kind of leaving off, where, Jesse, you had left off on this. But when you're dealing with this kind of case, I mean, how did you even verify anything? Is it just simply cross-referencing materials and test stories? And
we were able to track down a surprising number of the original police officers that found her body and investigated the case, and a lot of her family members are still alive, so we were able to just interview everybody and cross-reference their stories. That's interesting. A lot of the police officers were still around. So there must, I mean, really, if you think about it, significantly young officers serving at that time. I'm going to just tell you to hold for a moment, and we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Your host. You are listening to the Paranormal MD Radio Show live. If you would like to find out more about the ongoings of this show, me, the past guests, future guests, or Jesse and Mark in their new book, The Devil's Teeth, you can check that information out on the show website at theparanormalmdradio.com. So now let me get back to Mark and Jesse. Jesse. Yes. I'm really, really wanting to know if you can please continue with the rest of this story, because it, much like just let everybody else know at home, there's a certain amount I do know about the story, but like them, I'm learning too. So please tell us more. Where we left off was, like I said, they had to back a fire truck up to the edge of this cliff, and they got her down on a Stokes stretcher. What they did from there was they brought her to Elizabeth General Hospital to x-ray her remains, which were largely skeletal. After x-raying her remains, they found no bullet holes. There weren't any stab marks in her bones, no bone fractures. But there was something that happened during the autopsy that led the medical examiner to tell the press that we cannot rule out strangulation. They were not able to do a toxicology report because of the advanced state of decomposition, but they did do a tissue sample, and they found a high amount of lead in that tissue, which has yet to be explained. In your research, now when you're saying a high amount of lead, what could cause something like that? Personally, I haven't been able to figure it out. At first, I thought it might have been one of those rumors that started years later. There are plenty of those, but I've spoken with Jeanette's family. Jeanette's niece told me that. She said, yeah, we were all told that they found a lot of lead in her remains, and Jeanette's brother, Frank, went to the medical examiner's office several times trying to get an answer out of them about why this suspiciously high amount of lead was found in her remains, and each time they told him, back off. We have nothing to say. There's nothing here. Just let it go. We have no answers for you. You know, this story is very strange. I mean, there's so many unusual aspects to it. Now, you had said that you interviewed and spoke with her family. I think while I was actually looking at some articles that were in the Weird New Jersey magazine back when, there seems to be some discrepancy there because of her. There one was stating that she might have been a drug addict, another one that she wasn't a drug addict. That was an article in the Elizabeth Daily Journal that came out about a week and a half after her body was found. In the article, they were speaking with her mother, Florence, and they were asking her about her daughter's lifestyle. And Florence was quoted as saying she wasn't a heavy drug user. It was nothing serious like pills or heroin, but she smoked marijuana. And then the next day, in another article about the continuing investigation, they quoted Jeanette's father as saying, no, my daughter was not a drug user. That's false, what you printed. So there was a little bit of miscommunication there, or I don't want to imply anyone was lying here, but from what Mark and I have heard from her friends was that she was not a heavy drug user. She didn't even drink.
There's an extreme dichotomy between one person's story and another. You know, if you talk to some members of her family, they describe her as this prim and proper Catholic schoolgirl. And then you'll talk to some boy that she dated briefly, and she was this wild party girl. And then you talk about to some people, and they say, oh, well, she went to church with her parents 5 times a week. And then when you talk to some of the parishioners of that church, you find out that there's a whole weird story going on at the church where it's this whole hardcore evangelical ministry church where people are speaking in tongues. And the story is just like this onion that when you try to unravel it, it's just like there's one layer after another, and everybody is telling a different story and has a different remembrance of what was going on. Somewhere in there is the truth, but you have to dig through so much to get to it.
I can't even imagine how researching this had to be for you two, because in just listening to it, it's like, my brain's like audio. It's just like there's 20 different aspects going on here. So now, because of the height of this being her being found up on a cliff, and the stones, is this what started the idea of this being a sacrifice?
Well, aside from the symbols found around the body, the first reports of Satanism came from her evangelical minister, which they were in the suburbs, but they went to this inner city church in Elizabeth, which was miles away, and that's where they were parishioners. And it was the minister at that church who started telling people, the press and the investigators, that this was the work of the devil, and Satanists were involved. And I think that, and the media probably ran with that, but I think most of that, those quotations came from the minister.
Now, is it possible, because the type of town this is at, because of the religious beliefs, that this was intentionally set up this way to cover up a run-of-the-mill murder and or accident, for that matter?
There are certain echoes to, are you familiar with the West Memphis 3 case?
I am not, no.
It was a case in the early 90s in West Memphis, Arkansas. Pretty much like Jeanette, it involved children. It was 3 children that went off on their bikes to go play, and they didn't come home. And the next day, they were found in a wooded area in a creek. And for one reason or another, the police insisted this is a satanic murder. There was witchcraft at play here, and they arrested 3 young men, Damian Eccles, Jesse Miskelly, and Jason Baldwin, and they were self-described run-of-the-mill, bottom-of-the-barrel trailer park trash that listened to Metallica and read Stephen King, and they put them on trial and said these boys are Satanists, and they killed those 3 little boys in the woods, and they were sentenced to death, and they spent 20 years in jail until a couple years ago they finally were able to prove their case and get out on what's called an Alford plea, which is where you admit your guilt, but you get to go home. But because there was so much evidence to say that these boys did not do it, that this was what is called satanic panic. As far as the hard evidence in the case, the evidence that we've been able to really pinpoint as this was most likely true with Jeanette, assuming that these sticks and stones were around her, a situation with crosses around her and a perimeter of logs in the shape of a coffin does not ring of satanic overtones. It's Mark was one of the first to theorize that this was a shrine left by someone that felt empathy for her. It probably may not have even been left by her killer. One story that Mark and I were told by a retired police officer was that at a meeting between the Detectives Bureau in Union County, a Westfield detective took a look at the photographs of Jeanette's body and said, "Oh, that's witchcraft." And the detectives from Springfield said, "We're not looking at witchcraft here. Don't you go printing that." And sure enough, the next day in the newspaper, the Star-Ledger says, an unidentified source at the prosecutor's office says that the focus of the attention of this investigation is going towards black magic. So where the truth lies, we're really not sure with that, but there are elements of over-exaggerated satanic panic at work here.
I mean, it sounds like it, and it sounds very confusing because I think that you've alluded to is that not everybody may be being totally forthright about what happened before and after and things that were going on during that specific period of time. It is interesting to me. I mean, it's 1972, so you do have a lot of things with drugs and hallucinogenics, but we have to take another break. We will be back in just a couple minutes, so I just want to make sure everybody stay put. Don't go anywhere because we have much, much more to come, and you don't want to miss it. So hang in there. Welcome back. Second hour of the Paranormal MD Radio Show. I'm Mary Marshall, your host. Jesse, Mark, you're making my head explode.
If I had $1 for every time I heard that.
Jesse's head explodes every day.
Yeah.
Is there a release date for this book?
We got everything ironed out with the publishers just recently, and they gave us a 1 year from now release date. So it's not an exact date, but it will definitely be coming out just about this time next year, and that's good because I've learned from my long history with this case that just when you think you've come to the end of the line and like all the leads have gone dead, new things come up all the time, and it's from some of the most unlikely places. It could be some long-lost relative or friend of Jeanette's, or it could just be somebody who you meet in a bar that went to high school with her, and they say, well, I overheard this conversation she had with this person, and it's like, for me, I live very, very locally to where the murder occurred. I could walk to the spot where her body was found. So I do have interaction with people of that age that she would have been, around that area. So, in this year in between now and then, any number of leads could come up. I mean, we've been tracking leads nonstop. The trail has never gone cold. I mean, far from it. We're constantly getting new information.
We had developments happen about 4 hours ago, as a matter of fact, that are going to continue into tomorrow and the next week.
You're probably right. You're going to have a whole lot more people chiming in before the book even,
Well, we announced every year on the anniversary that Jeanette's body was found, We're New Jersey posts a mention of her on their Facebook page with a link to their page for her on their website. And we announced on September 19th of last year that we were putting this book together, and we were at that time searching for a publisher and to keep an eye out for updates. And just in the comment section alone on Facebook, we found several of her friends from high school. We found relatives of hers. We found people that knew suspects or knew of suspects from that time. So it's crazy what could be done just on social media now alone.
Yeah, that's true. Well, all right. Now, you just mentioned suspects. Can you give me a kind of rundown of who the suspects were at the time?
There are two suspects that are high profile in this case. There's one from back then when it actually happened, and one that Mark and I have discovered on our own. And Mark would be very well equipped to tell your listeners about a gentleman that was brought into the police department and was questioned around the time that they found her body and was considered a suspect at the time.
Yeah, that was really a turning point for us during this investigation, and it led us to somebody else, I think, and that was that I play in this band, and we play at the bars, local bars. And I ran into this sort of unusual character recently at a gig that was at a bar that was very close to where the murder took place. And late at night, he told me, "Call me up. I'll tell you who did this." And I was like,
Okay.
Okay. But he said, I won't tell you on the phone, and I'm not going to give you my name. You have to meet me. And I'm like, everybody I've ever talked to about this has said the same thing. I'm not going to tell you my name. I'm not going to write it down. You have to meet me. And, in my line of work, you have to be very careful about who you go out and meet, one-on-one. I'd much rather...
I told Mark to bring a gun.
I'd much rather talk to them on the phone or get an email from them, but for some reason they all have to tell their story, and that's across the board with everybody in this case. They're not going to give their name. It's crazy. I've never seen anything like it. But anyway, I met this guy, and he said, here's what never came out in any of the articles. Where she was found on the rim of this quarry is a wooded area. But right across the street is a very, very hoity-toity golf course called Baltusrol, old school money over there. And but at the time they were employing this groundskeeper and caddy who the only thing they knew him by was red. He was a transient. He was a homeless guy that actually lived in the woods. And it turns out where he lived was just this corrugated piece of metal shaped like a tent, and it was no more than 50 yards away from where Jeanette's body was found. And this guy I met, he said to me, "Oh, yeah, I went into the police. I told them all about Red. He lived right there." And his theory was that Jeanette was walking along the road there. She was a hitchhiker at the time. She was going to her friend's house. And he said, and this is all speculation, of course, but he's convinced of it. She went into the woods to relieve herself, and for what, either Red saw her there and, got ideas, or she panicked and he tried to quiet her down. And I'm not saying that's what happened, and I don't even think that's what happened, but what I think is fascinating about that is that now we have a person, an actual physical person, who we know was in that patch of woods no more than 50 yards away from where the body was found. And he was living there at the time. So even if he didn't kill her, he was living next to this decomposing body no more than a few yards away. And somewhere in that golfing season, before the season was over, Red disappeared and was never heard from again, allegedly. The police brought him in briefly for questioning and let him go without any ceremony or follow-up. So that was a lead that this is where we had to track down a transient who lived in the woods 30 years ago. And believe it or not, we have a lot of leads on where Red went and how he ended up. But it added a whole nother dimension to the story, because what I had always proposed with this crime was that logic dictates that no matter what happened, Jeanette was not alone when she died there. Because this was not a place where she went of her own volition alone and then, just OD'd and died. It's not a place where people went. Somebody in this world knows exactly what happened to her there in her last moments, and that's what we're trying to figure out.
It's just incredible to me, the amount of people that you have spoken to and have come across, and rather than it clearing things. I mean, it clears some things up. It's just so convoluted. I mean, there's so many different aspects here. I am going to have a few more questions for you as soon as we get done with this next break. So just hold your thought. And we are going to have to take a break and take a few words from our sponsor, and we will be back in just a few minutes. So hang in there. Good evening, and thank you for joining me tonight. You are listening live to the Paranormal MD Radio Show, and I am your host, Mary Marshall. So thus far, we've learned a lot about the murder of Jeanette De Palma on the program tonight, and we have more to talk to them about. But Mark, I have a question for you.
Okay.
You have, now your magazine comes out twice a year, but you also have travel books out there. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. Well, we published the magazine Weird New Jersey twice a year for, 10 years, I guess. And then Barnes & Noble approached us about publishing a Weird New Jersey book in
nice.
2003. And we had been contacted by other small presses prior to that, but we wanted to do like a really substantial book, and they were the first publisher that contacted us that was really interested in doing, a coffee table, full color, big, thick volume. So we did that book, and then a year later, in 2004, we put out a national book, which basically took the whole concept of the things that we covered in Weird New Jersey to a national level, and we featured stories from all across the country. And then after that, they signed us on to just start doing weird books for a number of states, and I think to this date we've done somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 of the 50 states. So yeah, it's been quite an enjoyable and a strange experience.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm sure it's strange because I'm sure I read some of the books, and just didn't realize at that point in time.
Yeah, well, you're in Ohio, right?
No, I'm in Illinois.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jesse's in Ohio. Yeah, well, we have an Illinois book and an Ohio book, so I have you both covered. That's why
no, as soon as we were talking about it and realizing that it's one and the same, it's like, who knew? I made the connection.
Yes. I not to be immodest, but I highly recommend and to anybody in any of those states or any of the other states that we've covered. It really is a compendium of all the unrecorded folklore of a state, all of the little whispered rumors and late night joyrides that you might have taken in high school, and at the same time, very unusual bits of history that have kind of they wouldn't teach you in school. So I'm very proud of all of them.
And you should be, because you know what, and you've got the audience for it because we like weird. So
absolutely,
that makes life more interesting. Jesse, you, before we kind of went to the break and getting back to the story about Jeanette, as far as her murder went, and you had mentioned to me off air something about another girl had went missing around that same time.
Yeah, while we were getting together the initial research material for the book, a lot of what we did was go get the microfilm articles for what was reported at the time, along with whatever was archived digitally on the Internet. And Mark and I came across this article from the Bucks County Courier-Times after Jeanette's body had been found, and it said, "Dead girl in New Jersey believed strangled." And Mark and I were reading it, and it was a very brief, UPI dispatch that had just the very basics of the case. But at the bottom of this article, it said, "This girl's death is the second in Union County this month earlier this month, the body of a woman named Joan Kramer was found strangled in Union. And this was the first mention of Joan Kramer and Jeanette De Palma in the same entity that Mark and I had ever found. So I started to look into this Kramer case, and I was immediately struck by how similar these two young women met their fate. On the night of August 15th, mind you, this is 1 week after Jeanette vanished, Joan Kramer, she was 24, looked strikingly similar to Jeanette, around the same height, same weight, long brown hair parted in the middle, and she was having a party at her parents' house in South Orange, which is about 10 miles away from Springfield. At some point, there was an argument with her and her boyfriend, and she stormed out of the house and walked about a mile into South Orange Village, which is at the base of this mountain that Joan Kramer and her family lived on. Jeanette De Palma and her family lived in a little suburb on top of the mountain in Springfield that's called Springfield Top. Now, Joan Kramer made it into South Orange Village and phoned a friend of hers in New York and told her what had happened at the party, and the friend said, listen, take a cab and just go home. And she said, okay. And for whatever reason, instead of hailing a cab at a streetlight at the train trestle at the base of the mountain, she got into a car and was never seen again alive. Flash forward 2 weeks, a young man by the name of John Hazenauer was walking through Elizabeth River Park in Union, about 6 miles away from where Jeanette's body was found, and he found Joan Kramer's body laying face down in a wooded area, and she had been strangled. So I looked further into this and found out some other interesting things. Jeanette De Palma was found with her purse, and she was found with her clothes on. She was fully clothed. The only two items that they did not recover from Jeanette De Palma's body were a golden crucifix that she wore around her neck the day she left home. That was not recovered. And her wallet was not recovered from her handbag, but the police, for one reason or another, believed an animal may have carried it off because everything else was there.
An animal? Why?
Yeah,
why
right?
An animal just carry all it off?
For whatever reason, that's what they told the press, you know. Even if she did have a wallet, I mean, as Mark and I were talking about last week, how many 16-year-olds in 1972 really needed a wallet. It's not like she had any photo ID.
Right, that's true.
So I looked a little further into this Kramer case and found out that Joan Kramer, while she was found nude, all of her clothing was nearby, and it was all recovered except for her shoes and a necklace she had been wearing. So we've got two girls that vanished while hitchhiking within a week of each other, only 2 towns away from each other, and they both end up strangled, laying face down in a wooded area in the Union area. The town of Union borders the town of Springfield. Like I said, they were found only 6 miles apart. And I thought, okay, well, I looked further in the microfilms, and I didn't find anything else. I was, as far as someone being arrested or anything like that.
It's worth pointing out that while at the time you would think, wow, these are so close together, and we're in an area where there are so few murders or violent crimes even, that the police would have maybe put 2 and 2 together and at least grouped these as possibly done by the same perpetrator, and there was no such investigation whatsoever into these 2 crimes as possibly being connected, which is unfathomable now.
There was a slight connection, but it was only seen by one entity. The Springfield Police Department, all of the retirees I've spoken to, when talking to them about Jeanette, I said, well, did you guys look into the Kramer murder? And they're like, never heard of it. It's like, it was widely reported. It happened the same week. It made national news because the young woman came from a very affluent family. Some articles even referred to her as a socialite. But the Springfield Police Department did not look into it being connected to the Kramer murder. And the South Orange Police Department, as far as we know, did not investigate the Kramer murder as being connected to the De Palma murder. Fast forward later, last year, I went to the Elizabeth Public Library to print out all the microfilm articles I could find on the De Palma case. On the September 1972 reel, the month that she was found, I got to the third week of that month, and the first couple of articles about her body being found were there. I go to scroll into the next week, and the reel pops out. I go to look at this microfilm reel. Someone had torn the last week off of that reel.
What?
Now, mind you, that film was there 10 years ago when I did our story. I have copies of some of the articles that Jesse was looking for. And when he went back, after all these years, for some reason, that film was missing.
So luckily, Mark did have his own copies, and this was before Mark and I had really officially entered into a professional partnership on this book. It was a matter of keeping each other posted at that point, and Mark was kind enough to send me his archived copies of these articles, and sure enough, that week that was torn off was the week that the Star-Ledger and the Elizabeth Daily Journal reported on a possible link between these two girls. In one article, the Union County Prosecutor's Office says, "We've set up a telephone tip line just for these two girls. Please call us." So somewhere in the last 10 years, someone went to that library and was either A, souvenir hunting, or B, did not want us to come upon that revelation.
Shouldn't, unless it was in 1972, I'm trying to think, but shouldn't the FBI have been involved in this?
No, at that point, the FBI was strictly involved with interstate. I don't think it's that way anymore, but back then it was strictly interstate crimes, meaning a perpetrator that goes across a straight line. So that makes it a federal thing. Back then, this was treated as a very, very local crime. And you have to remember, this is before FBI crime labs had DNA testing and stuff like that. So there was very little to go on, and certainly in the De Palma case, the police did really very little to investigate it. They seemed to jump right to the conclusion that this was, just a teen runaway who died in the woods. And we know that because I've interviewed people who were dating her, going to church with her. They were going to church with her just so that they could date her, because that's the only place where her parents would let her see boys socially. And I would ask them, after, all these years, I'd say, well, you were seeing her on a fairly regular basis, and, they were talking about how weird the church services were and so forth. And I would say, well, when the police came to talk to you about this, what did you say? And they said, oh, the police never contacted me.
What?
I said, what do you mean? I say, you were in her inner circle. You were the people she hung out with late at night. Wouldn't you think that the police would want to talk to her closest friends and people who she hung out with? I mean, wouldn't they be the most logical people to? No, never even contacted them.
Is the police department just inept, or are they concealing?
Well, that's actually one of the things we've been trying to figure out all of this time. Are they trying to cover their ass because they did such a lousy investigation? Or is it like people in the area originally thought way back when, that they're just covering up? They're not covering their asses for doing a bad investigation or a non-investigation. Is it possible that they're just concealing the evidence that they know exists and don't want anybody else to know? Are they protecting somebody, I think is the question that most people are asking.
You do have to question the fact of this being, I hate to use this word, but it's accurate, a conspiracy.
We have, believe it or not, there have been so many angles to this case. There's actually, people have made allegations of a mafia connection. The family was somehow connected, and this was somehow retribution to the family. The evidence is so convoluted and speculatory that you can't really even delve into it without any corroboration. But all of those things, we've heard, pagan biker gangs were involved. We know that there was a lot of weird rituals going on in that area at the time. In the early 70s, it was right near a place called the Watchung Reservation, and there was all kinds of weird rituals and ceremonies going on there. So a lot of people were speculating that this had something to do with that, and it was connected, and she was some kind of a sacrifice. That word sacrifice kept coming up. But it's such a murky area. We're just trying to put together the facts based on, hard evidence, which is really, it's a puzzle we're piecing together. And it's a very, very difficult thing until you get all the pieces in place.
Now, with the police that you did speak with, were they still active officers working for the department? Were they retired? And what is their response to things like how that investigation went, or any maybe personal comments? This is what it is on the record, but off the record, this is what I think.
Honestly, 99.9% of the law enforcement personnel we have spoke with are retirees. They were the people that were there when the body was found and the investigation commenced. Across the board, the ones that would speak to us told us pretty much the same thing. This was a town that was used to just handing out parking tickets, and there were occasional accidents and suicides, but this was not a township equipped to investigate a strange death or murder of this magnitude. And the police we've spoke to, the retirees, said when she ran away, no one cared because they just viewed it as another teenaged runaway. And when she was found dead, it was, she must have been doing drugs up in the woods, case closed. They were out of their league on this, and they, for one reason or another, they just didn't care.
We have a question from the chat room that says, was Robert Zarinsky ever looked at for these deaths?
I have to tell you, Mary, and I'm not trying to cover our ass or anything. We, especially at Weird New Jersey, and Jesse, he's seen these names because I sent him a lot of the letters. So many names have been thrown at us without any corroborating evidence. People will throw a name out and say, this guy did it, that guy did it, or this guy did it, and I know that, they say. They don't say how they know it, and it's like, and then other people say, why aren't you printing these names? And it's like, because that's slander and libel, and so many people were sending us names of potential killers that last year the Union County Prosecutor's Office called me up at the Weird New Jersey office and said, I hear you have information that you're withholding from us. I'm like, excuse me? Who's telling you this? And I said, okay. I said, you want to see what I have? Here you go. Here's a list of 24 names of people that other people think did this. And, it's like, I don't know whether they're just holding a grudge against a certain person, or maybe there was a person in town that everybody thought was the weird guy who might have done this. But I said, here, you want to go investigate this? Here you go. So what they did with it, I don't know.
I just did a quick search through my files I have here. Robert Zarinsky was a serial killer from Linden. I looked into him along with a couple other higher-profile killer names that were given to me. At one point, I was in contact with the Bergen County prosecutor's office, and they mentioned Zarinsky. They mentioned Joel Rifkin. I looked into them, and honestly, the M.O. doesn't seem to match what happened to her. Ted Bundy was even brought up to us at one point, and he wasn't even operating in that area.
Thank you, Connie, in the chat room for that question. Because there is no and this was another one that came up with a question of no statute of limitations, and because of what you're doing, and you kind of just alluded, Mark, that people were like, hey, what, prosecutors like, hey, what do you know that I don't know? Is because of all of the investigating and research you have done, or maybe it won't happen until the book is released, do you think that they will look into this case again more now, or just because it's 40 years old, they're just going to let it go?
Well, the impression that I got when they asked me for our evidence, which I think in recent years our tips and leads and evidence far outweigh theirs, because I don't think the people of this area are giving their knowledge to the police at this point. I think they're giving it more to us. The impression that I got was that they wanted to keep current with the information that we had, yet I didn't get the impression they were going to run with that ball beyond the fact that, okay, now we have this evidence in our files. I didn't get the impression from them that it was going to spur them on to reopen or re-establish an investigation.
Okay, here's another one, and this is something that I came across in going through the notes. In 84 or 85, someone said a relative of Jeanette sought psychiatric care. This relative discussed Jeanette's death in case with him. After this relative was told by the psychiatrist that he could no longer treat her. What was that all about?
That is something that was brought up to us by a relative of Jeanette's. Out of respect for the relative that sought help's privacy, I won't name the relative. We were told by one of Jeanette's relatives that another relative sought psychiatric help in the Phillipsburg area of New Jersey. And after a couple weeks of sessions, this relative mentioned, my relative Jeanette was murdered in the 1970s. And this psychiatrist said, I can't treat you anymore. I'm treating someone involved. Whatever, quote, someone involved means, whether it was a police officer that investigated the murder or if it was a suspect of some sort, we don't know. We have not been able to track down that psychiatrist yet, but it was a very weird twist that the case kind of took when we were told that. We're still actively looking into that connection right now.
Of all of the unusual facts of this case, is there something, and you can both answer this individually, that in the course of your research, and with so many shocking facts, did you discover something in particular that shocked you or disturbed you more than some of the other discoveries and facts that you uncovered? Oh, I got you with that.
I was hoping you would go first. God, I'm going through the mental Rolodex right now. There's just been so much. Like, honestly, I was pretty naive when I decided I was going to set out and try to write this book, because I just figured, no one else is doing it. The information is out there. I'll just collect it and put it together, and hopefully it'll shake something loose in the case. And I had no idea what I was in for with this. I mean, honestly, and Mark and I talk about this a lot. The fact of the matter is the police insist, oh no, she was up there partying. There was a party and something went wrong, or, she OD'd up there alone. And the fact of the matter is she would have never been found if that dog did not bring her arm home. And to me, it's just been the most disturbing part of this case is this girl. I mean, she was a child. She had only just turned 16 3 days prior.
Right.
This girl left home and met her demise at someone else's hand, and she laid there alone, just a couple blocks away from her home, while people, or her family or friends, were looking for her, trying to figure out where she is, and she just laid there alone, day after day, until finally, not to sound gruesome or anything, but she was only found because a dog found her, tried to wake her up, and pulled her arm off and brought it back home. But who knows if she would have ever been found. She might still have been laying there today if that dog didn't go wandering.
Yeah, that's a great point. And for me, the most disturbing aspect of this whole story and investigation has been, like I said before, of all the people that we've talked to, nobody wants to go on record. Whether it's the police who investigate, even the ones that help us want us to use a pseudonym, the neighbors, the friends, almost to every single one, they don't want their name used because they're still afraid. Now, you relate that to, let's say, a girl who just turned 16 goes missing these days, and you see the entire community come to the aid and lend their support to try to find that person. And if that person is found dead, everybody rallies to bring the killer to justice. And they have no qualms about saying their name. This is unheard of now. This girl, the reason the book is called The Devil's Teeth is because these stories that the police were feeding us about, just some teenage runaway getting high in the woods, and, this isn't the woods. This is the Devil's Teeth because the cliff she was found on top of, where she lay for months decomposing, was so remote. From the bottom of the quarry, if you looked up at it looked like a turned-up skull where the teeth of the cliff stuck up along the ridge. That's how difficult this place was to get to. This was not a kid who ran away, some delinquent that died alone of an overdose. Somebody out there took this girl's life, and all we want to do is let people know that.
We have only a couple minutes left, but I do want to give you both a final say on this. So as of now, is it witches? Is it a satanic ritualistic murder? Is it red? What do you think happened?
Well, at this point, any scenarios we could give you would be speculative, but I think based on our, what we're doing with the book is formulating a strong case scenario based on the best evidence we could gather and make a reasonably deduced conclusion based on that. But there are still a lot of loose ends, and that's, there are threads that are going to fall into place between, this homeless guy living up there, between the allegations of the police conspiracy and so forth. But a lot of that is going to come together between now and the time the book is published. So we really can't tie it up in a neat little bow for you tonight.
That's okay. Gentlemen, we're nearing the end of the show here. I just want to say thank you so very much for being part of the show and bringing us the story about Jeanette. It's obviously gruesome, but it's been fascinating at the same time. I commend you for your research and for bringing the story to the public, and not letting Jeanette's tragic death and wonderful life be forgotten. So thank you very much for being part of this episode, and I'll let you gentlemen get back to your evening. Please know that information and links to Jesse and Mark's website, as well as where to purchase their book once it is released, they'll let me know, will be posted on the website, and maybe we can have them back on. As always, I appreciate you listening and joining me this evening, and I bid you farewell until next week. Good night.